The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the room, but Eric didn't stir. He lay still, his body unmoving, as if in a deep trance. The strangeness of the night before seemed to linger in the air, an oppressive silence hanging over the house. Christabel, in her human form, sat beside him at first, watching his motionless body with a strange, knowing expression. As the hours passed and the day wore on, she made no attempt to wake him. Instead, her eyes shimmered unnaturally, cold and distant, as she observed him. By the time the afternoon sun began to dip, Christabel was no longer in her human form. Her body had shifted into that of a large snake, curled tightly at the foot of the bed, her unblinking red eyes fixed on Eric. Her tongue flicked out periodically, tasting the air. The hours passed, yet Eric remained asleep, not even a twitch escaping him. It was as though something held him captive in his dreams. As the clock struck midnight, Christabel stirred. Her serpentine body began to grow, expanding larger and larger until her coils nearly filled the room. Her scales shimmered in the dim moonlight, and her eyes burned even brighter, glowing like the sun. As the clock struck midnight, Christabel stirred. Her serpentine body began to grow, expanding larger and larger until her coils nearly filled the room. Her scales shimmered in the dim moonlight, and her eyes burned even brighter, glowing like the sun. Slowly, she slithered toward Eric, her massive form looming over him. With a hiss, the snake leaned down and hovered over Eric's head. Without a moment of hesitation, she opened her mouth wide and spat a thick, glowing substance onto his forehead. As the liquid touched Eric's skin, his body jerked violently. His eyes snapped open, but they were glassy, unseeing. His mouth opened in a silent scream as something began to emerge from his body. His spirit, a translucent version of himself, slowly separated from his physical form, hovering in the air above him. His eyes, now filled with confusion and fear, darted around the room. What is happening? Eric's voice was shaky, filled with terror. He looked down at his own sleeping body on the bed, completely stunned. Am I dead? Christabel, still in her snake form, raised her massive head and spoke in a low, guttural voice that sent chills through Eric's soul. Welcome, my husband. No, you're not dead yet, she hissed, her red eyes locking onto his. Your spirit now belongs to me. Eric's heart raced as panic surged through him. Christabel, what are you talking about? What's going on? He tried to move, but his spirit form felt light and unsteady, like he was lifted to some unseen force. The giant snake, unblinking, extended her mouth toward him, her fangs glistening. You have crossed into my world now, Eric. Your journey is just beginning. With that, she lunged forward, her mouth wide, and swallowed Eric's spirit whole. Everything went dark. When Eric opened his eyes again, he was no longer in his bedroom. The air around him was thick with the stench of death. He was standing in what looked like an endless dark cavern, dimly lit by flickering flames from scattered torches. The ground beneath him was wet and sticky, and as he looked down, he realized he was standing in a pool of blood. His heart pounded in his chest as he looked around. Everywhere he turned, there were dreadful sights: human remains, rotting flesh, and bones piled along the narrow walkway. The walls seemed to pulse, as if the entire place was alive, breathing. Eric's breath came in ragged gasps. Where are we? He whispered, his voice trembling. From the shadows, the massive snake emerged again, its eyes glowing in the darkness. Christabel's voice, still dripping with malice, echoed through the cavern. This, my husband, is your new home. The realm of the spirits. Our journey has only just begun. Your flesh will still be alive doing whatever I instruct it to do, but your spirit has been trapped in me. Months into their marriage, life for Eric had taken on a strange, dreamlike quality. He had grown used to Christabel's odd behavior, the way she sometimes stared off into space for hours, how she avoided being too close to him at night, and the strange energy that seemed to linger in their home. He tried to convince himself that everything was normal, that he was imagining things. But deep down, he knew something wasn't right. One morning, Christabel approached Eric with a look of discomfort on her face, her hand resting on her stomach. "I'm pregnant," she announced, her voice cold and detached. Eric, shocked and excited, jumped up from his chair. "What? Christabel, that's amazing. We are going to have a baby." But Christabel's expression remained hard. "I don't want this, Eric," she said bluntly. "I'm not supposed to be pregnant." Eric's joy quickly faded into confusion. "What do you mean? We're married, we have talked about starting a family. Why are you saying this?" Christabel turned away, her eyes distant. "You don't understand," she muttered under her breath. "Christabel, what are you talking about? This baby is a blessing." Christabel looked at him, her red eyes flickering for a moment. "I can't have this child," she whispered to herself, but Eric caught it. Over the next few months, Christabel's attitude toward the pregnancy remained distant, even hostile. She would spend long hours in the bathroom, muttering to herself, sometimes imagine looking frustrated and angry. Eric knew she was trying to get rid of the baby, but no matter what she did, the pregnancy progressed. One night, as she lay on the bed, she whispered to herself, "I am a goddess, a serpent of the underworld. I should not be burdened by this human curse." Her fingers trembled as she traced the swell of her belly. This child shouldn't be. But despite her efforts, the baby finally arrived. On a stormy night, the cries of a newborn echoed through their home. It was a boy, and to Eric's surprise, he was perfect. He was a handsome, healthy baby with large brown eyes and a thick head of dark hair. Eric felt his heart swell with love and pride as he held his son for the first time. But Christabel showed no interest in the child. She barely looked at him, her eyes cold and distant, her resentment palpable. One day, Eric came home from work, his body tired but his mind eager to see his son. As he stepped into the house, he immediately felt that something was wrong. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, the kind he had felt many times since marrying Christabel. And then he heard the sound of the baby crying. But it wasn't coming from the child's room. It was coming from the bathroom. Eric's heart raced as he hurried down the hall, the cries growing louder and more desperate. When he reached the bathroom, his breath caught in his throat. Inside, the baby lay in his crib, wailing uncontrollably. But he wasn't alone. Coiled around it was a massive python, its scales glistening in the dim light, and its red eyes burning with a menacing glow. The snake circled the baby, its body moving slowly, deliberately, as if it were threatening to swallow him. For a moment, Eric stood frozen in terror. The same red-eyed python from his nightmares was now here, in his home, circling his son. His pulse raced, panic rising in his chest. He had no idea what to do. Then, something snapped inside him. Without thinking, he turned and ran back to his bedroom. He flung open the wardrobe and grabbed the cutlass his father had given him long ago, its blade sharp and glistening in the faint light. Clutching the cutlass, Eric charged back to the bathroom. The python's eyes shifted toward Eric as he approached, its body coiling tighter around the child. It hissed, a low, menacing sound that sent chills down Eric's spine. Without hesitation, Eric raised the cutlass high above his head and swung it down with all his might, aiming directly at the snake. The blade sliced through the air, whistling as it made contact with the python's thick scales. Eric stood in the doorway of the bathroom, staring in shock at the enormous snake circling his baby. His breath caught in his throat as the creature's red eyes locked onto his. For a split second, Eric froze, terror gripping his heart. But then, the sound of his son's soft cries snapped him back into action. I have to protect my child. With a cry of determination, he swung the cutlass down toward the snake's head. The blade struck with a sickening thud, embedding itself deep into the serpent's skull. The snake hissed violently, its body twisting and writhing in pain. Blood poured from the wound, splattering across the floor. The snake tried to slither away, but it was too late. Eric had already swung again, the blade slicing deeper into its flesh. The creature's movements grew weaker as it thrashed, blood gushing from the wound, pulling around the floor. "Stay away from my son," Eric shouted, his voice trembling with both fear and rage. The snake's red eyes began to dull, and its body convulsed one last time before it stopped moving. For a brief moment, Eric thought it was over. He exhaled, wiping the sweat from his brow, his heart still racing. But then, something unbelievable began to happen. The snake's body started to convulse again, but this time, it wasn't the thrashing of a dying creature. The scales on its body began to ripple, as if they were melting away. Eric stared in horror as the snake's form shifted and shrunk, its massive body folding in on itself. No, this can't be," Eric stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Before his eyes, the snake transformed. Its long, slithering body shortened, its scales giving way to pale human skin. Within moments, lying in a pool of blood where the snake had once been, was Christabel. Eric staggered back, dropping the cutlass in shock. Christabel lay on the floor, her chest rising and falling shallowly. Her hand clutched her neck, where blood was now seeping from the wound. Her face was pale, her once beautiful features now twisted in pain and fear. "Eric," she gasped, her voice hoarse. "Help me." Eric stared at her, his mind reeling. She had been the monstrous snake he had fought to protect his child from. His hands shook violently as he took a step toward her. "Christabel, what?" Christabel's body continued to weaken, her skin pale and slick with blood. But something even more horrifying was happening. The skin on her arms and legs began to peel away, as though it were shedding like a snake's skin. But Eric couldn't move. His mind was caught between disbelief and terror. He watched as Christabel's human skin continued to peel away. After Christabel's skin had peeled completely off, Eric saw. Eric stood frozen, staring at the body before him, but something unexpected began to happen. As Christabel's serpent's skin fully shed, what lay beneath was not a dreadful-looking monster but a beautiful young woman. Her features were soft, and her body was no longer twisted in pain. The blood, which had been gushing out moments ago, had stopped. She was no longer bleeding. Instead, she knelt on the floor, tears streaming down her face. Eric blinked in disbelief. He had expected horror, but what he saw was something entirely different. What's happening?" he whispered to himself. The woman looked up at him, her tear-filled eyes meeting his. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "You saved me." Eric's grip on the cutlass loosened. "Saved you? What do you mean? Who are you?" "My name is Emiliana," she said, her voice trembling. "I was trapped inside that snake form. It wasn't truly me. I've been bound to it for years, since I was a child. You freed me." Eric took a step back, his mind still reeling from the shock of everything that had happened. "What do you mean, trapped?" "Christabel, no, the snake, it was you." Emiliana nodded, her tears falling freely now. "Yes. I was cursed by my grandmother. She initiated me into the snake coven when I was young. I've been bound to the snake form ever since. Every part of me, every decision I made, wasn't my own. It was the coven's control over me." Eric stared at her, trying to piece it all together. He felt a surge of emotions, confusion, anger, but also relief. "But Christabel, I took on the name Christabel," Emiliana interrupted. It was the name I was given when I was in that form. The coven wanted to hide the truth, to make sure no one knew what I really was. Eric took another step closer, still holding his son tightly in his arms. So, everything that happened, the deception, the snake, you were being controlled. Emeliana nodded. Yes. I never wanted any of this. I tried to fight it, but I couldn't. Until tonight, when you killed the snake, you broke the curse. I'm free now. Tears welled up in Eric's eyes as he thought back to all the moments of confusion, the times he doubted himself, and the times his mother had warned him. I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me before? Why didn't you ask for help? I couldn't, Emeliana said, her voice soft and full of regret. The coven had complete control over me. I couldn't reveal the truth. The snake was my prison, and I was bound to its will. Eric's mind was racing. Everything he had known, everything he had thought was real, was suddenly different. Emeliana wiped her tears, her expression softening. I don't know. But I want to live. I want to make things right. I never wanted to hurt anyone. Eric lowered the cutlass completely and took a deep breath. You say the curse is broken. That you're free now? She nodded again. Yes, the coven no longer has control over me. You freed me. In the days that followed, Emeliana's presence in Eric's life felt strangely natural. She was gentle and kind, and as they spent more time together, they realized that there was a connection between them that went beyond the chaos of the past. Eric's mother, who had been deeply skeptical of Christabel from the beginning, was cautious at first. But when she met Emeliana and heard the full story, she saw the truth in the young woman's eyes. Slowly, she too began to accept her. I never trusted that snake, Eric's mother said one day, sitting with Emeliana in the kitchen. But you're different. I see it now. Emeliana smiled softly. Thank you. I promise, I'll do everything to be worthy of your trust. As the months passed, Eric and Emeliana's relationship deepened. There was no longer the shadow of the snake coven looming over them. Emeliana, now free, was filled with a sense of purpose and determination to build a new life with Eric and their son. Eventually, Eric proposed to Emeliana, not out of obligation or duty, but out of love. They had found something genuine in the ashes of the past, and both of them were ready to start a new chapter. The wedding was simple but filled with joy. Eric's mother was there, beaming with pride as she welcomed Emeliana into the family. The years of confusion, pain, and fear were behind them. And as Eric and Emeliana stood together, holding their son between them, they knew that, despite the darkness they had faced, they had found a way to live happily ever after. Thanks for watching. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to be notified whenever we post a new video. See you in our next video.